Today we're going to be taking a closer look at something pretty fascinating.
Yeah, we've got some really interesting stuff to unpack about Starlink.
Starlink, exactly. For those of you who don't know, Starlink is SpaceX's satellite-based internet service. And we're going to be focusing on its global presence, where it is right now in March 2025. And we're also going to dive into a particularly significant development that just happened over in India.
Yeah, this is a big one. I think by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a solid understanding of not just how Starlink works, but where it stands globally and what this recent agreement in India could mean, both for connectivity around the world, but also for the competition in the satellite internet space. Should be a really interesting discussion.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get right into it. First things first, for anyone who might be new to all this, can you just break down what Starlink is at its most basic level?
Yeah, sure. So at its core, Starlink is SpaceX's, it's their project to provide internet access from space. And they do this by using, get this, a massive network of satellites, thousands of them.
Thousands. Okay, so it's internet from space, but how is it different from like the traditional satellite internet that people might already know about?
The big difference is the type of orbit they use. Starlink uses low Earth orbit, or LU, and that means these satellites are positioned much closer to Earth. I'm talking about around 550 kilometers, which is a lot closer than those geostationary satellites that traditional satellite internet relies on.
So closer to Earth. What's that actually mean for the everyday user? What difference does that make?
Well, that closer proximity translates into some major performance benefits, and we're talking about two key areas here: speed and latency. So with Starlink, you're looking at download speeds that can range from 50 to even 250 megabits per second. And then there's latency. That's basically the delay in data transfer. And with Starlink, that can be as low as just 20 to 40 milliseconds.
Wow, so that's like,
That's fast.
yeah. It's practically like having a wired connection, which is a big deal for satellite internet, right?
It is, yeah. Historically, that kind of latency has been a real issue for satellite internet, making things like video calls or online gaming, well, they were pretty frustrating, to be honest.
So instead of just a few satellites way out there, we're talking about a whole network of them, much closer, blanketing the Earth.
Yeah, exactly. You can think of it as a mesh network in space. And the cool thing is, a lot of these satellites are equipped with laser links. That means they can talk to each other directly, without always needing to send signals back down to ground stations.
Oh, I see. So how does that affect coverage, especially in areas that are more remote?
It's a huge advantage. It allows them to provide coverage even in the most, far-flung corners of the world,
Mhm.
over oceans, vast stretches of land, places where traditional ground-based internet infrastructure just wouldn't be feasible. And for the user, all you need is a portable terminal to connect. So you can basically take your internet with you wherever you go, as long as you're in a Starlink service area, of course.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's a great breakdown of the technology itself. Now let's talk about Starlink's global reach. Give us the big picture. What does their presence look like in March 2025?
Okay, so as of March 2025, SpaceX has launched over 8,000 Starlink satellites.
8,000.
8,050 to be exact.
That's a lot of satellites.
It is, yeah, it's a massive undertaking. But, not all of those are fully up and running yet. Out of those 8,050, around 7,095 are actually in orbit at the moment. And out of those, about 6,382 are operational, actively providing internet services. So still a massive amount.
Okay, over 6,000 operational satellites. It's a pretty incredible infrastructure they've built. In terms of geography, where can people actually subscribe to Starlink today?
So Starlink is available in, get this, over 60 countries. That includes big markets like the US and Canada, most of Europe, Australia, and they're expanding rapidly in parts of Asia too. It's not just for individuals either. We're seeing Starlink pop up in other industries where reliable connectivity is absolutely crucial. Well, for example, they're providing in-flight Wi-Fi for some airlines. They're enabling communications for maritime operations, ships out at sea, and even, get this, they're supporting defense applications.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Huh.
Okay, so that brings us to the news that really caught our attention. Starlink's agreement in India. Can you tell us what exactly happened there in March 2025?
Sure. So the big news is that Starlink has teamed up with Bharti Airtel. They're the second largest telecom company in India, and together they've signed an agreement to explore the possibilities of offering satellite-based internet services across India.
So it's not a done deal, not a full launch just yet. More like a partnership to, test the waters.
Exactly. Right now, they're focused on figuring out how to bring better internet connectivity, especially to rural and remote parts of India, places where it's hard to build traditional ground-based infrastructure. And this partnership is particularly interesting because of India's regulations. They recently made a change that requires foreign companies like SpaceX to have a local partner if they want to offer telecom services.
Oh, I see. So having Airtel on board wasn't just a good idea. It was basically essential.
Pretty much. It was a prerequisite if Starlink wanted to even consider operating in India.
So assuming they get all the approvals and everything, what kind of impact could Starlink have in a country as big and diverse as India?
I mean, the potential impact is enormous. India has a massive population, and a lot of people, particularly in rural areas, still lack access to reliable broadband. If Starlink can get things up and running, it could be a game changer. We could see millions of people suddenly having access to high-speed internet. It could revolutionize things like education, healthcare, even the economy in those underserved areas. It's a big deal.
It sounds like it. But Starlink isn't the only one looking at India, right? There are other players in this space.
Oh, absolutely. The Indian satellite internet market is getting pretty crowded. In fact, OneWeb, and funnily enough, they're also backed by Bharti Airtel. They've already got permission to launch their services in India. And then you've got Jio Satellite, which is Reliance Jio's own venture into this. We can't forget about Amazon, right? They've got Project Kuiper, and that's expected to enter the Indian market eventually, too. So, yeah, it's going to be a very competitive landscape.
Very competitive. So with all that competition, what are some of the hurdles Starlink might face in India, even with Airtel as their partner?
Well, the biggest hurdle right now is getting approval from the Indian government. Specifically, they need the green light from the Department of Telecommunications, the DOT. And that means jumping through all the regulatory hoops, making sure they meet all the local compliance standards, getting the necessary licenses, the whole 9 yards.
So a lot of red tape to cut through.
Yeah, there's definitely some bureaucracy to navigate. And then, of course, there's the whole competitive landscape, right? They've got to figure out how to stand out against players like Jio and OneWeb, who, already have a head start in some ways. They'll need to think about things like pricing, making sure their service is affordable, and just generally how to capture market share.
So a lot of challenges to overcome.
Yeah.
But looking ahead, what's the best case scenario for Starlink in India? When could we actually see them offering service to people?
Okay, so the best case scenario is that they manage to navigate all those regulatory hurdles smoothly, get all the approvals they need, and then leverage that partnership with Airtel to, really hit the ground running. Airtel already has a ton of experience in the Indian market, so they could help speed things up quite a bit.
Okay, so realistically, when could that happen?
Well, some folks are saying that we could see a rollout of services as early as late 2025, maybe sometime in 2026. But, and this is a big but, that timeline is totally dependent on getting the go-ahead from the Indian government. So fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Okay, so just to recap everything we've talked about today.
Right.
We've gone over how Starlink works, their incredible global presence, the strategic importance of this partnership with Airtel in India, the competitive landscape they're stepping into, and of course, all those regulatory challenges. It's definitely a fascinating situation to watch unfold.
It is, yeah. And I think it really highlights how important satellite internet is becoming in the quest to, bridge the digital divide. Starlink's move into India, along with what their competitors are doing, it just shows how satellite technology is increasingly seen as a critical part of our future communications infrastructure.
It's a really exciting time for sure. So as you're thinking about all of this, consider the bigger picture. What does this mean for the future of global communication? Will this competition in the satellite internet space lead to, even more innovation, maybe even lower prices for consumers everywhere? And it's not just about internet access either. Think about all the other industries that could be completely transformed by this technology in the years to come. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
All right, we'll catch you next time.